Released in 2009 exclusively for the Wii, Sonic and the Black Knight is the second game in the Sonic Storybook series. And it's also the last. And if you could just look beyond the screen, it's pretty easy to see why. But there's way more to it than just ew motion controls, as Sonic and the Black Knight, as well as its predecessor Sonic and the Secret Rings, had a lot going for them. Charming visuals, interesting concepts, hype moments, awesome tunes, and most of all, the storybook games simply weren't afraid to break away from that egg-shaped norm. So, what went wrong? Well, if you saw my Secret Rings review, you're probably already aware that it's not a very good game. It's just littered with problems, which, yes, was mostly the controls, but also with things like pacing, padding, and objectives. But Black Knight actually fixes those issues. Mostly. But it's lacking in its own way, though you wouldn't realize it at first. Fortunately though, Black Knight hits the ground running. Figuratively, as the opening cutscene just gets right to it. Sonic gets isekai to another world, is smart enough to realize that the big scary armored guy leading a literal horde of monsters against one lone girl is, shock of all shock, the bad guy, and promptly proceeds to do what he does best.
Oh, I get it. No problem. I'm used to stuff like this.
Of course, it's not going to be that easy. The big bad is bland and boring. Immortal. He's immortal. That's what I meant. And the only way to bring him down is by collecting the sacred swords from the Knights of the Round. Oh god, I wish. No, it's these guys who look awfully familiar. But in order to do that, Sonic must become a true knight himself. And really, what is a knight without his trusty sword?
My squire, your intellect is as sharp as my blade, and your lowly
Yeah, well, it's got a pretty smart mouth on it for a sword.
I'm a Shara. Now, obviously, the most notable difference between this Sonic game and literally any other is that Sonic is now the type of fighter that Smash Bros. Has been sorely lacking.
Let's do that again sometime.
And with it comes a very, very different control style than Sacred Rings. In Sacred Rings, you held the Wiimote like a classic NES controller, with the majority of its actions being tied to the motion controls, which, at best, were occasionally functional. I mean, hell, even the stuff that was mapped to the buttons was kinda spotty. This time around though, we've got the movement tied to the joystick on the nunchuck, a major improvement. And with the exception of the sparse side-scrolling segments where the movement completely breaks, come on! How? You grew up in side-scrolling! Right, so aside from those moments, Sonic is much easier to control now, no longer being forced to just run forward against his will. And, as you'd probably guess, the Wiimote is your trusty sword. Give it a swing to wield your blade, just like in Twilight Princess.
as impressive as your sword skills are in the bedroom.
Also, like in Sacred Rings, you have a meter that you can fill up by grabbing rings and destroying baddies, that allows you to use a super attack that can be chained between foes. And it's not just Sonic. In a nice little twist, late game, and I do mean late game, we're talking after the credits here, you unlock Shadow, Knuckles, and Blaze as playable characters, which at this point does make sense for them thematically to be working with you, so points for that. And they all actually play differently enough to be worth experimenting with. Though let me tell you, Knuckles' glide ability, completely busted. Other than that, this time around, it's pretty straightforward. After a barrage of tutorial stages, seriously, so many tutorials, Most of the stages just have you running to the finish, with the occasional stage focused around helping civilians or slaughtering a set number of monsters. It's all very samey, with everything eventually starting to blend together. And while yes, there absolutely are extra missions to accomplish, higher grades to reach, and some crafting to be done with our local blacksmith, ye olde tales, none of it is mandatory, or even necessary. They really trim the fat this time around, and Black Knight is surprisingly short, clocking in at around 3 to 4 hours, which is to the game's credit, not really overstaying its welcome. But here's the thing. Secret Rings, despite forcing you through stages again and again with fluff missions, was honestly much bigger in scope and way more interesting. Stages had a lot of variety, like deserts, a mystical palace, a pirate cove, freaking dinosaurs. That definitely wasn't in the Arabian Nights. Though, arguably, its greatest strength was taking advantage of the storybook setting and just how interesting the world is, despite how very little actual exploration is available. By comparison, Black Knight is much tamer, sticking to its Arthurian lore more closely, with many of its settings just being in fields, old towns, and castles, as well as a Dragon's Keep. All of which, by the way, are colorful and look great, especially coming from an era of gaming that really liked its brown and grays.
We're not done yet.
But it just doesn't stand out the way its predecessor did. Except for the storybook cutscenes that absolutely trump Secret Rings in every way, with more vibrant colors and small animations that look fantastic.
I just gotta do what I've gotta do! That's all!
The music, while not bad by any means, this is still a Sonic game after all, just doesn't hit as hard, despite reusing a lot of cool older tracks, like Shadow's theme. Plus, and maybe this is just my opinion, it definitely doesn't use its strongest song, Night of the Wind, as cleverly as Secret Rings use 7 rings in hand. Why is this not blaring during either final boss fight? Oh, wasted opportunity. But the biggest offender by far has to be the boss fights, which of their 2 types. The one-on-one nightly challenges, which aside from the fight with Blaze, I won by just mindlessly swinging my Wiimote. Yeah, that's what you call skill.
Your dick is small.
Though honestly, these fights are pretty fun despite being so short. But the bigger, badder boss fights? Not so much. The 2 big ones that I think most of us expected really just boil down to bad QTEs, which just sucks all of the fun out of them. Pro tip: during the boss fights, a prompt will appear telling you to swing the Wiimote. Ignore it. It will get you killed again and again and again and again. Ugh. The real indicator is the blade glowing, which, in all fairness, the game does tell you early on, but man, is that UI distracting. And all of these problems being here at the end does kind of leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth that honestly drags the whole experience down. Who knows, maybe the tacked-on multiplayer will help remedy that. Yeah, but I doubt that. Huh. Oh. Okay. So, maybe I was wrong. We actually got ourselves a little treat here at the end. Instead of just another Mario Party clone, this time around we've got a bit of a Power Stone kind of deal going on, with multiple modes, including your basic deathmatch, scoring the most points by taking out enemies, and even a group team up against a large boss. Okay, this is actually pretty cool. The only downside is that you have to have at least one other player to even give it a shot. No AI opponents or partners available. Honestly, I just plugged in the second Wiimote just so I could try it out, and from how it controls and feels, I actually think it would be a pretty fun time with a group. For a short while at least. Both the campaign and the multiplayer in Black Knight was built off the mistakes of Secret Rings, and as such, it should be a better game. And you know what? It is. But that was also a pretty low bar to clear, and doing so plants it squarely in the okay to fine range. And sadly, better doesn't always equal memorable. Black Knight doesn't bring about the rage that Secret Rings did. It lacks the novelty of Sonic's first adventure with motion controls. And worst of all, its story, characters, and worlds are just blander. And with the exception of the final transformation, which was and still kicks ass, it didn't live up to the potential the Sonic book stories had, ultimately closing the book on that chapter.